Good morning, friends. Go ahead and stand and let's worship together.
darkness run for cover, but the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders, I have resurrection power. still a miracle that I just can't get over. My name is registered in heaven. My praise belongs to you forever. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Come together, sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son, and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Yes, our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Oh, greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. my words fall short. I got nothing new. How could I express all my gratitude? I could sing these songs as I often do. Every song must end, and you never do. So I throw up my hands, praise you again and again. 'Cause all that I have is a hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah, I've got one response. I've got just one move. With my arms stretched wide, I will worship you. So I throw up my hands and praise you again and again. 'Cause all that I have is a hallelujah, hallelujah. And I know it's not much, but I've nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah,
Sing this together, church. Sing, come on, my soul.
Oh, come on, my soul. Oh, don't you get shy on me. Lift up your song. 'Cause you've got a lion inside of those lungs. Get up and praise the Lord. Oh, come on, my soul. Oh, don't you get shy on me. Lift up your song. 'Cause you've got a lion inside of those lungs. Get up and praise the Lord. So come on, my soul. Oh, don't you get shy on me. Lift up your song. 'Cause you've got a lion inside of those lungs. Get up and praise
Let's pray together. Father, when we pause and we think of all the ways that you've served us and that you've given to us and that you've first loved us, I hope that our hearts are filled with love for you. I do pray that even now as we worship you and as we prepare to give attention to your word, that your Spirit would pour your love more deeply into our hearts and that we would love you like we love no one else. And that with your love overflowing in our hearts, we would love each other as you have commanded us to. But we can do none of this apart from you. And so we ask you to do this work through us and in us, and we ask it in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Good morning, Horizons Church. Would you welcome your neighbor before you find your seat?
When fear is coming, still you're calling me. When faith is lost and my hope exhausted, you will be my strength. When my mind says I'm not good enough.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well today. This first weekend of August means we're only a few weeks away from football season. I saw some Steelers gear in here. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. We haven't met yet. My name is Josiah. I'm the lead pastor here at Horizons Church. Very glad that you're worshiping with us today, especially if you do happen to be new or recent. We'd love to meet you. Pastor Steve is back. He's back. He's preaching today. Yeah, there you go. Everyone's excited about that. He was off for a couple months thinking heavenly thoughts to share with us, so should be really good. No, we're glad to have him back. He's going to be preaching today, and when he's done preaching, he'll be over at the welcome area over there. We'd love to shake your hand and give you a gift and tell you a little bit more about the church, all right? And whether you're new or you've been here forever, if you're not into doing things the old-fashioned paper way, we've got an app that you can utilize that'll help you out with in-service items here during the service today. So if you want to follow along with Steve's sermon, we got the sermon notes uploaded in there for your convenience. And also you've got access to a digital connection card. So if you've had any updates to your information, if you've moved, new phone number, or any prayer requests you want to let us know about, you can do all of that right in the app, and it makes its way to us, okay? So if you haven't downloaded that and you want to, you can feel free. And as always, you can give through the app as well. So those of you who continue to partner with us financially and help us do the ministries that we get to do here throughout the week on a daily basis, but also what we get to do here on a weekend. We're so grateful that you support the ministry that we do here. And so if you'd like to start giving or continue giving, you can do so utilizing any of those four methods that are up on the screen right now, okay? Last thing I've got to mention for you is our prayer room to your right. Erica's in there praying for us, so if you have a need and would like to utilize that, feel free at any point during the service, okay? We do have one brief video announcement, and then Pastor Steve will be up to kick off a new series called Rematch. So take a look at the big screens, and then he'll be up to deliver the message.
We are about to listen to a message taught from God's Word. This is one of the most important parts of our gathering. Therefore, we ask you to silence your cell phone, not engage in conversation, and not allow your child to cause a distraction. If your little one does create a distraction, we kindly ask you to respect those around you by taking your child to our clean, safe nursery, using our family viewing area in the cafe, or one of our cry rooms located behind you, where you can see and hear everything, and your child will appreciate the extra freedom.
Well, good morning. Hi, it's great to be back. Jody and I have been off for a couple of months. We knew this series on conflict was coming up, so we had a couple fights over the next couple last months, to kind of get tweaked up and, get back in the game, But anyway, Just glad to be back. When we're off for a couple months, and we kind of got the old guy schedule, where we get a couple months off in the summer, and we appreciate that. But we travel around and try to visit some other churches, and I'm just always reminded when I step into a church as a guest of what it feels like to step into a place where it's not your church, it's their church. People move from that church to your church to my church. And when I go visit folks, it's not my church, it's their church. And I miss something because I don't belong in a sense. I belong as a Christian, but it's not my church. And folks are here every week, and they come here, and it's your church. And they want it to be their church, and sometimes you're the difference. And just a reminder to me of how important it is for us to walk up to somebody we don't know, and we don't know whether they've been here for a year or this is their first week, and just ask them, hey, how long you been coming to Horizons? That's a safe question. How long you been coming to Horizons? And then just have a conversation. Maybe they say, I've been here for a year. Well, how do you like it? Or they say, this is my first week. Well, let me show you around. Did you meet anybody? Did you get a gift? It's so important because people want to move from that church to your church, to my church, and you can make that happen. So please do that. We are back, and we're starting a new series. It's called Rematch, and this opening message is it's kind of an introduction to the whole series, and so we've just entitled it Rematch. In 1842, a couple known only as Jeff and Rebecca wrote a scathing article that exposed the hypocrisy and the arrogance of a guy named James Shields. Then they published that article in a prominent newspaper in Springfield, Illinois. Now today, no one knows James Shields, but in 1842 he was a household name in Illinois because he managed the finances of that state, and he and his political party had managed to so mismanage the state's money that Illinois was teetering on bankruptcy. But it wasn't just the incompetence of James Shields that caused Jeff and Rebecca to pick up their pens and write their searing rebuke. The tipping point for them was an outrageous financial policy that Shields had just announced to the people of Illinois. In 1842, the state of Illinois printed its own money, and James Shields used that money to pay the state's debts. And he required that the citizens of Illinois accept his paper money as payment for their goods and for their services. However, James Shields knew that the Bank of Illinois was teetering on the verge of collapse, and so he announced to the citizens of Illinois that they could no longer pay their taxes with the paper money that the state had printed. Instead, all taxes and debts due the state of Illinois had to be paid with silver and with gold, and that was just a bridge too far for Jeff and for Rebecca, and so they picked up their pens and they launched a scathing attack against James Shields, and they published it in a newspaper. I mean, Jeff and Rebecca went after Shields like tag team wrestlers in a cage match. I mean, Jeff hit him high and Rebecca hit him low. And Jeff attacked Shields for his unfair policies. He railed at the hypocrisy, the sheer hypocrisy of requiring him as a hard-working farmer to accept the state's worthless money for his crops and then refuse to let him use the very money that the state had printed to pay his own taxes. Why, it was outrageous. It was unfair, and it meant that the money that Jeff had managed to squirrel away in the bank was virtually worthless. Now, Rebecca, on the other hand, didn't target Shields' unfair policies. She went after him personally. She called him a liar. She called him a fool. She painted him as a deluded Casanova. James Shields was not a tall man nor an attractive man, and Rebecca suggested that his lack of good looks is why he was still a single man. Now, everyone in Springfield knew that James Shields tried to compensate for his lack of game with the ladies by being arrogant and vain and self-promoting. And so when Rebecca claimed that Shields had recently told a room full of young women that he was just sorry that he couldn't marry all of them, and he apologized that there was just one of him, but it just wasn't his fault that he was so handsome. and so interesting. Well, the irony of those words and of mockery and derision from Rebekah were not lost on the readers. And so once Jeff and Rebekah's article hit the newsstand, Springfield was abuzz with whispers and snickers, and James Shields became the laughingstock of that city. Well, Shields could take the criticism of Jeff, but the mockery and the derision of Rebekah, it was just too much for his wounded pride to endure. And so he sent one of his friends to the newspaper to find out who Rebekah was so he could confront her personally and demand a retraction from her. But to his surprise, when Shields' friend got to the newspaper, they told him that Jeff and Rebekah didn't really exist at all. No, they were just the creations of a lawyer who served in the Illinois State Congress. And therefore, if James Shields really wanted to confront Rebekah, he should travel to the next county because he'd find her arguing a case in the courthouse in the next county over. And so on the next day, Shields sent his friend to the next county with a letter in his hand to Rebekah demanding a full retraction and an immediate apology. Well, when Shields' friend entered into that courthouse, the culprit wasn't hard to spot. He was a 6'4" gangly lawyer who was arguing his case in a high Kentucky twang. Because the sharp-tongued Rebekah was none other than a 33-year-old lawyer named Abraham Lincoln. So when there was a break in the court's proceedings, Shields' friend approached Lincoln with the letter, handed it to him, and that letter, which accused him of being Rebekah, and demanded an immediate and full retraction. And Lincoln scanned the letter. He neither affirmed nor denied that he was Rebekah. Instead, he just, in a lawyerly tactic, handed it back to Shields' friends and told him that if Mr. Shields wanted a retraction, he should ask for it in a more gentlemanly manner. Well, that just poured gas on the fire, because when Lincoln's response was conveyed to James Shields, he was so outraged, he was so insulted, that he challenged Abraham Lincoln to a duel. Shields determined that if Lincoln would not publicly retract his insults and his mockery, then they would settle this on a field of battle. They would have a duel, and only one of them would live to tell the story. Well, Lincoln was now in a real mess. If he refused to accept Shields' challenge, he'd be labeled a coward and his political career would be over. But if he went through with this duel, there was a very good chance that he would end up in a coffin. The only upside for Lincoln was that dueling etiquette of the day required that since he was the guy who was being challenged to the duel, he got to choose what weapons they would use in that duel. Now, James Shields may have been arrogant, self-absorbed, and he may have been a hypocrite, but he was no coward. He had fought in 2 wars. He knew his way around a gun, and Lincoln knew if he chose to use pistols in this duel, he could very well end up just like Alexander Hamilton with a bullet through his heart. And so Abraham Lincoln accepted Shields' challenge, but he announced that the duel would not be fought with pistols. It would be fought with broadswords. And it would be fought in a 12-foot pit. Well, dueling was illegal in Illinois, but it was allowed in Missouri, so Lincoln proposed that the duel should take place on Blood Island, which was an island in the middle of the Mississippi River between those 2 states. And to his surprise, Shields agreed to both the location of the duel and to Lincoln's choice of weapons. And so on the evening of September 22nd, 1842, 2 boats paddled up to Blood Island, one carrying Lincoln and his party, the other carrying Shields and his friends. An anxious crowd gathered back on the banks of the Mississippi back in Illinois to see which one of those 2 men was actually going to come back alive. But before Lincoln and Shields could step into the pit and begin their duel, each man was handed a long, heavy sword, the kind of sword that was used by the United States cavalry. Now, Lincoln was 6'4", Shields was just 5'9". And in a sword fight, a 7-inch advantage in height and reach, well, that tipped the scales to Lincoln's favor. And just to underscore that point to his opponent, when Lincoln got his sword, He picked it up, he swung it high over his head in a sweeping arch, and he lopped off a limb that was hanging over he and Shields' heads and dropped it right down between them and looked right at him. But Shields didn't blink. He was intent on having this fight. Well, as the two of them were about to step into the pit and begin lopping off body parts, a mutual friend stepped in between them and begged them not to go through with this duel. He pulled Shields aside, he convinced him, just withdraw the letter that you sent to this man. Just withdraw it. And when Shields agreed to withdraw the letter, Lincoln agreed that he would not refuse. He refused to stop criticizing Shields' policies, but he apologized to him for mocking him and for insulting him and treating him with derision to make his point. And so James Shields swallowed his pride, and so did Lincoln. And they called off the duel. No one died that evening on Blood Island, but September 22nd, 1842 could have ended very differently for both men if they hadn't changed how they fought. Lincoln's life could have ended that night, or he could have lived the rest of his life with the blood of James Shields on his hands. Lincoln nearly lost his life and his career because he chose to use a toxic tactic called invalidation to win an argument with Shields, and then he upped the antes and allowed that conflict to escalate until it became a duel. Now, conflict is inevitable in this broken world. There's going to be times when you and I disagree with our mates, with our kids, with our boss, with a family member, with a teacher, with a political rival. The question is not whether we're going to have conflicts in our lives. The question is, when conflicts come, are we going to have a good fight or are we going to have a bad fight? And what Abraham Lincoln learned on September 22nd, 1842 was the difference between a good fight and a bad fight is how you fight. Now, the policies of James Shields were self-serving and morally indefensible, but that did not justify Lincoln treating him with mockery, derision, and contempt in order to win his argument and make his point. Doing so nearly cost him his life. And so from that day forward, Abraham Lincoln determined that he would hold on to the voice of Jeff, and he would respectfully attack his opponent's policies, but he would let go of the tactics of Rebecca. And he refused to use insults and contempt and mockery and derision to win his arguments. Now, Lincoln's life, if you know anything about Abraham Lincoln, his life was filled with conflicts. But after September 22nd, 1842, he changed how he fought. And because he did, when the Civil War broke out, James Shields, the man who wanted to kill Abraham Lincoln, volunteered to serve under him in the Union Army. And Abraham Lincoln, the guy who almost hacked up James Shields with a broadsword, promoted him to the rank of brigadier general when Shields handed Stonewall Jackson his only defeat in the Civil War. Now, if Lincoln had been killed in that duel on September 22nd, 1842, you know and I know that our nation's history would be drastically different. But because Lincoln humbled himself and he found a way to fight respectfully with a man who he vehemently disagreed with, Lincoln didn't die on Blood Island. Instead, 20 years later to the day, on September 22nd, 1862, 20 years later to the day of that duel, Abraham Lincoln picked up his pen once again and he signed his name to another document that he had penned, but he didn't sign it as Rebecca. He signed it as the President of the United States of America. And we call that document the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, we're going to begin a 5-week series on how to turn bad fights into good fights. And what we're going to learn as we end this series is that turning bad fights into good fights always comes down to changing how we fight. Because there are certain tactics that are absolutely toxic to any relationship you're in. So if you use these tactics on your husband, on your wife, on your kids, on your in-laws, on your neighbors, on your coworkers, you may win your argument and you may get your way. But you will systematically poison and destroy those relationships. You see, the question isn't will things like withdrawal and invalidations and negative interpretation and escalation. The question is not, will those kinds of tactics help me win an argument and get my way? Of course they'll help you win an argument. Of course they'll help you get your way. We wouldn't use such cruel tactics on people we love unless they would buckle under the pain of those kind of tactics. The question is not, do these tactics ever work? The question is, what is the cost of using them? That's the question. And the answer to that question is if we use things like withdrawing, avoiding conflict, or just slamming the door, walking out, and say, fine, have it your way. Invalidations, insults and put-downs and derision. Negative interpretations, taking things that are neutral or good and turning them around and making us the victim and them the bad guy. Escalation, just anteing it up again and again and again to try to win. If we use those things in our arguments, we will systematically kill our relationships, whether it's with our wife or with our husband or with our kids or with our in-laws or with our siblings or with our friends or with our coworkers. In fact, the cost of using these tactics is so predictable, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the number one predictor of whether your marriage and your relationships will last or not is not if you fight, but how you fight. Now, you can learn that truth the hard way and lose your marriage, be alienated from your kids, become a pariah at work. You can learn it that way. That's the hard way. Or you can learn these truths the easy way by just humbling your heart and listening to what God's Word has to say. Now, my hope is that you'll do the second, that you'll take this opportunity just to listen to God in this series and change how you fight so you don't lose the most important relationships in your life. God communicates at least a third of the Bible to us in the form of stories. Because stories are one of the easiest ways for us to see and learn and internalize life-changing truths. And so when God wanted to show us how to have a good fight and how to avoid bad ones, He didn't just give us commands and prohibitions. He gave us those. But He didn't just give us those. He also showed us through story after story after story in the Bible what happens when we use withdrawal and invalidation and negative interpretation and escalation to win our arguments and get our way. Last week we learned that Moses got water out of a rock when he lost his temper, railed at the children of Israel, and then struck that rock with a staff rather than speaking to it as God told him to. And did Moses get water? Did he get what he wanted? Sure, he got the water. He got the water, but it cost him dearly. He died in the desert, never went in the promised land because of that choice. And in the same way, you can ignore everything that we have to say over the next 5 weeks, and you just keep right on using, withdrawal and invalidation and negative interpretation and escalation. You can keep doing that to win your fights and to get your way. But what you're going to learn in this series is that using such tactics to win your arguments comes at a terrible price. Because every time you use them, you systematically destroy the most important relationships in your life. The top two priorities of the kingdom of God are not love God like you love no one else and win all of your arguments at any cost. That's not the top two priorities of the kingdom of God. It is not. The top two priorities of the kingdom of God is love God with all your heart and love your neighbor how? As you love yourself, even when you're arguing with them. So let's start this series by looking at a story in 2 Samuel chapter 6 that spells out for us in clear multicolored detail the terrible price we pay if we choose to have bad fights rather than good ones. Now, the two people we're going to look at in this passage are King David and his wife Michal. Now, ironically, on the on one of the best days of David's life, his wife picked a fight with him. And that fight ended up being the last straw in a strained relationship. Not because they had a fight, but because how they chose to fight. And that brings us to our first life principle. Sounds like this. How you fight is the number one predictor of whether your marriage and your relationships will last. It's not the only factor, but it is the number one predictor of whether your relationships and your marriage will last. Let me just show you that from the life of David. Now, David's wife was named Michal. She was the daughter of King Saul, who was the first king of Israel. But because King Saul had repeatedly ignored God, gave in to his fears, made self-serving choices, God took the throne away from Saul and his family, gave it to David. And one of the terrible choices that Saul made when he was king of Israel was he left this symbol of God's presence called the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was a gold-plated box with two angels, cherubs, facing each other. And when God wanted his presence to be seen amongst the people of Israel, his presence appeared as a cloud or as fire between those two cherubs. Well, Saul left that Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence with his people, in the hands of a man named Abinadab in a place called Kiriath-Jearim. Now, Kiriath-Jearim is a Hebrew word which we might translate into English as Woodville. And that's where it was. The ark was down in Woodville. When Saul became king, the Ark of the Covenant had been down in Woodville for 20 years. And Saul chose to leave it there in obscurity for the entire 40 years of his reign, rather than returning it to its rightful place at the center of Israel's life, government, and worship. Now, when King Saul died, David became king, and he determined that he was going to change that. And so, 10 years into David's reign, he went down to Woodville to get the Ark of the Covenant and end its 70-year exile from being at the heart of the life of Israel. Now, it took David 2 tries to successfully move the Ark of the Covenant from Woodville up to Jerusalem. And there's a whole story behind that we're not going to get into. But in 2 Samuel chapter 6, David was finally able to usher the Ark of the Covenant into the city of Jerusalem on the shoulders of the priests. But what's remarkable about this return of the ark to Jerusalem was that David led the procession and that ark into Jerusalem, not as a king wearing his kingly robes and a golden crown. He led that procession as a worshiper, and he wore a simple linen ephod like the men wore who served in the tabernacle. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, and when the Ark of the Covenant was picked up this second time to try to move it, to get it to Jerusalem, they went 6 steps and they stopped and they offered a sacrifice. And David humbled himself before God. And he led the people in repentance for mishandling this ark and for leaving it in exile for 70 years. And David led the people in mourning and repentance. And then when the procession started up again and began to move towards Jerusalem, David's mourning turned to joy. And he danced before the Lord in worship, an absolute abandon. He led the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem as a jubilant worshiper. It says he danced, which means he whirled around in such joy he couldn't contain himself. It was quite something for the people of Israel to see their king worshiping God with first in this humility and then with such joy. I mean, King Saul had ignored God for 40 years. But David was sending a clear message that things had changed and there would be no more business as usual. God would no longer be ignored. He would be given his rightful place at the center of Israel's life, its worship and its government. And David was sending a message that he as a king was going to lead this nation, not simply from power, but as a worshiper who humbled himself before God. Now, that was a great day for Israel. It was one of the best days of David's life. But David's wife, Michal, didn't see it that way. Because Michal didn't get on her knees with her husband and repent. She didn't get up on her feet and usher that ark into the city of Jerusalem with David. No. She watched this whole drama play out from a window up in the palace, dressed in her royal robes. And as Michal looked down on her husband from her perch, she didn't see a man humbling himself before God as a worshiper. She saw her husband debasing himself before his subjects. She saw a king acting like a commoner and dishonoring her as his queen. Now for David, this day was all about honoring God and restoring him to his rightful place in the nation of Israel. But for Michal, this day was all about her. It was all about her. It was about her husband dishonoring her by dressing like a Levite and dancing before God like a common worshiper rather than acting like a king. It was about her. It was about Michal feeling diminished because she didn't get the respect and deference she thought she was due as the queen. And the Bible says as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, which is at the southern part of Israel, of Jerusalem, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched where? She watched it from a window. She didn't participate. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord in worship, what did she do? She despised him, held him with absolute contempt in her heart. A few verses later, it says, when David returned home to bless his household, it's been a great day. He's going to come home and bless his home. Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. And when she came out to meet him, the insults and the contempt and the derision were just dripping from her words. How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today. Oh, my. Didn't you look like something? Disrobing in the sight of your who? Your slave girls? Your servants, your subjects? Like any vulgar fellow would? Oh, yeah, she laid it on thick. And with those words, one of the best days of David's life turned into one of the worst days of his life because his wife chose to have a bad fight rather than a good one. Now, almost all bad fights begin with either negative interpretation or an invalidation. Negative interpretation, you take something that's neutral or good and turn it around. It isn't about you, but you make it about you, and you become the villain. You become the victim, and that person becomes the villain. Or it starts with invalidation. That's a put down. It's an insult. It's treating somebody with contempt and derision. Well, Michal started this fight with both. Because the first thing Michal did was to put a negative interpretation on David's good actions. Michal concluded in her heart that when her husband took off his royal robes and worshiped God like a commoner, that he wasn't honoring God, he was dishonoring her. She turned this event that had nothing to do with her into an event that was all about her. And then she determined that the only explanation for her husband's behavior was that he was intentionally trying to dishonor her in the eyes of the people. And the Bible says because of that, she despised him. She held him with contempt in her heart, which justified anything she might say. And then Michal put David on trial in her heart, and she found him guilty of intentionally trying to hurt her. She convinced herself she was the victim, her husband was a villain, and all that happened in her heart before she ever said a word to David. She negatively interpreted the situation. And so when David walked into the door to celebrate this amazing day with his wife, Michal met him not with, hey, honey, what a great job. Gosh, I'm just so proud of you. No. She met him with insults, accusations, all wrapped up in a negative interpretation. And her words were dripping with contempt when she attacked him personally. How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, oh my. Disrobing in the sight of his slave girls, the slave girls of his servants, his subjects. This kind of thing a vulgar fellow would do. It was a put down. It was an insult. It was an invalidation. And the whole thing was wrapped up in a negative interpretation. So how did David respond when Michal attacked him? Well, he did just what you and I often do. He gave her a zinger right back. He upped the antes. He escalated the conflict. He said, I did this before the Lord. Now, if he'd just stopped right there, he'd been fine. He didn't have to defend himself. He was doing this before God. All he had to do was just say, I was doing this before God, honey. This isn't about you. But he didn't. He couldn't resist sticking in the knife and turning it, you know. So he said, I did this before the Lord who chose me rather than your daddy. Yeah, he knows how to get her. Or any of his family, includes you, babe. And he chose me. God appointed me, M-E, to be the ruler over God's people. Boom. Mic drop. Then he got his senses back and he quit insulting her. And he simply told Michael that he was going to continue to humble himself before the Lord, and he had no problem becoming even more undignified in his worship before God, if that's what it took for him to lead the people of God as a humble king. So how did this conflict end? Well, Michael and David didn't come to their senses. They didn't change how they were fighting. Instead, they dug in, they doubled down, and they decided to have a bad fight rather than a good fight. And ended up, they withdrew from each other. This argument became the last straw in a very troubled relationship. They didn't get a divorce, but the Bible says, Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children in the day of her death. And my friends, that did not require a supernatural judgment from God. They went to separate bedrooms. Two people were angry with each other and despised each other. And their whole passion life fell apart. And she never had a child. So how did this happen? How did Michal get to a place where she used those kind of tactics in a man that she said she loved? How'd she get there? How did this woman become a person who would use such tactics and then just stick to them until it just destroyed her marriage? Well, I don't know if you noticed it, but Michal is referred to 3 times in this passage as the daughter of Saul. The daughter of Saul. Every time her name comes up, she's called the daughter of Saul because she's acting just like her father. You know, Saul was a notorious negative interpreter. He was a serial invalidator. He was a man who loved to escalate conflicts, and he would do it to the point and the person was so afraid for their life they would withdraw from him just to keep from being killed by him. Michal was called the daughter of Saul 3 times in this passage because the apple didn't fall very far from the tree. And I think that's the second cautionary tale of this passage. You see, your kids are watching how you fight too. And the choices you're making in the heat of conflict are either setting your kids up to succeed or fail in their marriages and in their relationships because you're teaching them. You and I are teaching our kids either how to have a bad fight or how to have a good fight. And that brings us to our second life principle. How you fight will set up your kids for failure or success in their marriage and in their relationships. It doesn't dictate what is going to happen in their life, but it certainly sets them up. It sets them up. Now, let me just go back and just kind of show you what I mean by this. You may remember that when David was a teenager, he killed a giant named Goliath with a stone in a sling. Let that thing go, hit the giant, knocked him down, and ran up, chopped his head off. And when King Saul saw that kind of courage in David, he immediately recruited him to be part of his family, or part of his army. He wanted him to fight for him. And so he brought him in, made him part of his army. It was one of the best decisions, probably one of the only few good decisions Saul made in his life. Because every time Saul sent David out with a band of men to fight the Philistines, David just handed it to the Philistines. He just gave him crushing defeat after crushing defeat, and Saul was elated. He celebrated David. He was glad to have him as a ringer on his team, and he just kept sending him out, and he just coming back with victories, and he was doing the happy dance. Until David came back with his men one day from a victory, and the women went out to meet him, and you know the story. You remember it. They came out to meet him, and they had written a new little ditty, a new song just for the occasion. And when they met David and his men, they brought him into the city, celebrating his victory, singing, "Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Well, everything was just fine in Saul's heart until he heard those lyrics. And he loved David, was glad to have him on his team, until he heard those lyrics. And then he immediately put a negative interpretation on that song, and he put a negative interpretation on David's victories, and he judged David in his heart and said, David has a treacherous heart, and he's trying to take my throne, and he's trying to take my kingdom because he is no good. And he tried to kill David, not once, but twice, in the same day. The Bible says Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They've credited David with tens of thousands. This is all he says. It's in his thoughts. He says he thought. It's in his mind. It's in his heart. But me with only thousands, what more can he get but the kingdom? He's trying to steal my throne. No evidence of that, but he's negatively interpreted it. And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. And the next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. And as he was prophesying in the house, and while David was playing his harp, which he usually did, and Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin him to the wall." And David eluded him twice. I mean, he stuck that thing to the wall and apparently apologized, said, "I'll come back, play some more." And he tried again. Saul put David on trial in his heart. He found him guilty of treason and treachery by a negative interpretation that had no basis in facts. And then he escalated that conflict and threw a spear at David and tried to kill him. And if that wasn't enough, when his own son, Jonathan, tried to intervene and defend David and protect him from his father's insane anger, Saul turned to his own son and said, "You're a son of a perverse and rebellious woman." There's a twofer. He got his son and his wife in that one. You're a son of a perverse and rebellious woman. I mean, the things that come out of our mouth, right? But Saul didn't stop there. He picked up that same spear and he threw it at Jonathan, his own son, just like he did at David. Seems that when Saul wants to escalate a conflict, he's got a go-to plan. Let's chuck a spear at him. Of course, the result of such toxic behavior with King Saul his son became alienated from him, and he completely lost his relationship and the benefits of having with David and having him on his team. And if you ask me, how did Michal become a woman who used toxic tactics to win her arguments and ended up destroying the most important relationship in her life? How did she do that? How'd she get to that place? I think the answer is pretty clear. Michal learned those tactics where? Where'd she learn that? From her daddy. She learned those things from her father. She first became the victim of those things, those behaviors in the home, and then she turned right around and became the perpetrator of them in her own home. Now, God tucks stories like this into the pages of the Bible so we can learn from them and avoid the kind of poor choices that Michal and Saul made. And in so doing, we can avoid the terrible consequences that they experienced. Because just like Michal, many of us grew up in families where every stinking fight was a bad fight that we witnessed. You may have grown up with a constant diet of invalidations and negative interpretations and escalations and withdrawals coming at you. And the temptation for you when you hear a message like this is just to throw up your hands and say, "The situation's hopeless, dude. You don't know what I grew up in. It's just too hard for me to change." It's baked in the cake, man. But here's what I know, and here's what I've seen. I know that many moms and dads won't do the hard work of life change just to improve their own life. But I've seen it with my own eyes. They'll do some really, really, really hard things to improve their kids' lives. And so if you won't change how you fight to save your own marriage, your own job, your own friendships, if you can't find it in yourself to do it for your own life, please do it for your kids. Find the strength to do it for your kids, because your kids are watching how you fight. And they're learning how to have a good fight or how to have a bad fight because you're modeling for them. What you're modeling for them is either setting them up for success or failure. They'll add their own mess to the mix, but you have a part of this. Now you may say, well, Steve, I just don't think that kind of life change that you're talking about is even possible for me. I mean, I grew up, this kind of toxic tactics were just pretty much default setting for my parents, and they've become pretty much the default setting for my life. How do I know that this is even possible to grow up in a family like mine and make this kind of change? Well, let me just end this message by talking to you for a minute about another person in this story. His name is Jonathan. He was the son of King Saul. He was the brother of Michael. He grew up in the same home that Michael did, and he was on the receiving end of his father's toxic fighting tactics just like Michael was. And yet every time Jonathan is drawn into a conflict in the Bible, you know what happens? Jonathan ends up having a good fight rather than a bad fight. Why? Why did Michael turn left and Jonathan turn right? Why did that happen? Well, I think because Jonathan intentionally chose not to fight like his father, nor his sister. And if Jonathan can do that by the power of God in his life, I'm confident that you and I can do it by the power of God in ours. Now, Scott Stanley is a Christian counselor who lives in Denver, Colorado. He and his team have studied and tracked couples for decades to see what relationships succeed, which ones fail, and why. And they've come to a point where they've discovered they can watch how a couple fights for just 15 minutes and predict with over 90% accuracy whether that couple is going to succeed or fail in their marriage. Because the most reliable predictor of whether a relationship is going to succeed or fail is not if you fight, but how you fight. And if your conflict is marked by withdrawing from conflict and invalidating your other person and negatively interpreting everything that's going on in front of you and escalating the conflict in order to win, if those are the things you're doing, then your relationships have a high probability of failing. But here's the good news. You can change that. It doesn't have to stay that way. That can be different. You can write a different history for yourself and for your family. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at each of those 4 destructive tactics and through the lens of the Bible, and we're going to see why those tactics are so toxic, and we're going to discover how to replace those destructive tactics with constructive ones, so that we can please God in our arguments, and so that we can celebrate the value and the dignity of the image bearer we are arguing with, and by God's grace and by God's help, we're going to stop having bad fights. We're going to have good ones, right? God's going to give you a rematch. Most of us don't have 20 fights. We have 2 or 3 fights over and over again, either with the same person or someone else. I can almost promise you, you're going to get a rematch. And when it does, what I'm saying to you is, when the rematch comes, you have a chance to fight differently. You know, if you want to go a little deeper and you want to go through this series, as we go through this series, then I would encourage you to pick up Scott Stanley's book. It's called A Lasting Promise, How to Fight for Your Marriage. It's worth the money, worth the effort. You can get it in, printed version. You can get, if you don't like reading, but you're a good listener, you can get it in audio book. Get it, buy it, enjoy it. Let it improve your marriage. Let it improve your relationships. Let it improve your life. But until next week, here's what I'm asking you to do. Get up every day and pray a prayer something like this. God, teach me how to turn my bad fights into good fights. Give me a rematch, and I'll fight differently. I'll learn. I'll change. Show me how. Give me the power. I want a rematch. I want to turn my bad fights into good fights. Help me do that, God. Will you do that this week? Will you just ask God to help you with that? And we'll come back next week and start putting it together and show you how to do it. How to do it, okay? Until then, if you have a fight this week, have a good one. All right? God bless you. Have a great week.